Hi, I'm Andy Jones. Welcome to Art Talk. Today we are going to be painting a masterpiece of contemporary art. We will be painting Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. This is arguably the most famous painting in the world. I don't know if I subscribe to that or not, but at any rate, it's very recognizable and it is a beautiful painting. Here is my copy of it, and I did an adequate job. If someone looked at this, they would recognize it as Starry Night, but then you have to go a long way for someone not to recognize any interpretation of this painting. So this painting was done in 1889 by Vincent van Gogh when he was a patient at the asylum in Saint-Rémy, France. So we're going to do it kind of my way. We're using acrylic paint today. We're using folk art acrylics, and I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this. So I'm going to move my painting out of the way so that we have a nice palette ready to start work on. So the first thing I'm going to put out on my palette is some folk art titanium white, and this is one of the colors that's available in our beautiful 17-piece set. And you see I put a huge glob of white out. You're going to need a lot of that. And I'm going to put out a big glob of brilliant ultramarine. And I have my giant palette knife, and I'm going to make a light blue color. We'll be putting some more white out in a little while, so don't worry about that. And I want you to just relax and not get yourself geared up for this. We're painting our loose interpretation of a very famous painting. Yours is going to look nothing like Vincent's. Mine looks nothing like his, and yours is not going to look anything like mine.
And this is kind of a tradition in the art community, right? Painting the masters and learning from them.
Absolutely, Dylan. And copying masterpieces is very often done, and you'll see people sitting in museums painting. Most museums do have a requirement that if you are copying one of the works in their collections, that it can't be the same size as the original. That's usually where they kind of draw the line there. But we're doing this kind of out of respect for Vincent van Gogh and just out of respect to art in general. So I've made a very nice kind of medium value, very, very pretty blue color. If you're familiar with the Don McLean song, it is the china blue that is reflected in Vincent's eyes. So what we're going to do is kind of give our canvas a once-over with this blue color, and we will in fact be painting the entire canvas. You want to put this on, doesn't have to be a thick coat, doesn't need to be a super thin coat. Our goal here is just to get this really pretty blue color on the canvas.
Now we're going to be sharing some Vincent van Gogh facts and some controversies and questions as we go along.
Yes,
but do I remember correctly, this was the view out of his window? Well, one of his windows?
If you listen to some people, and this is where I'm going to tell you right now. Okay,
we're getting into it.
We're getting into it. We're really going to have some art talk today. And unfortunately, most of what you get is my own interpretation of history. I was an art history major in college, so I did study quite a bit of art history and read and did all that kind of stuff. And it's much easier now because you can find great information on the internet. You can also find bad information. But the idea that this was the view from his window at the asylum is not quite true. It is a view of the town of Saint-Rémy. The problem is it's on the opposite side of the asylum from where Vincent's rooms were. So he would have had to have gone outside the asylum and walked around and seen this. So more than likely what happened is that Vincent went outside at night, of course with the permission of the doctors there, and they were very, very good to him. There they let him set up a studio and paint as part of his convalescence from basically a bad, mental health episode. And so he probably went outside and looked at this scene, a number of times before he actually painted it. And so it is the village of Saint Remy, and it would have been easy for him to see this from the asylum, just not from his own room there. So that's dispelling one of our myths. There are as many myths as true stories about Van Gogh.
The next biggest is probably being that people thought he was a genius.
Well, yes, that during his lifetime, probably no one ever associated the word genius with Vincent van Gogh. They had a lot of other things to say about him, but within a couple of years of his death, art critics and art dealers and things were already considering him a genius and talking about him in those kind of glowing terms. I think now the way that people really talk about him as being some sort of tortured genius. And he wasn't a tortured genius. He was a guy who decided to be a painter kind of later in his life. He didn't start out as a child being a painter, and just he had, all kinds of troubles, and he was, pretty good toward the end of his life, but when he started out, he wasn't that great. All right, I've got a little bit of a paper towel here in my hand, and we're going to establish two main aspects of the Starry Night painting. One is going to be a swirl of paint that comes up and around this way. And one thing that's interesting about, I'm not really getting as much paint off of here as I wanted to, but I am taking paint off. As you can see, it's coming off. Believe me. I mean, that's how people describe him. And he was, he became a very, very good painter as he moved on in his career. Van Gogh started painting when he was 27 years old. That's pretty late in an artistic career at the end of the 1800s, that most people would have been painting for a while by that age. But he did a lot of really good work. And then we've got a little bit of this curve that comes back this way. One thing that was a huge inspiration to Vincent van Gogh were Japanese woodcuts. You're all familiar with the woodcut of the wave. So he would have seen, that kind of woodcut and understood how aesthetically pleasing the Japanese woodcuts were. All right, so I've really taken quite a bit of paint off of the canvas here, and I'm going to put some more white out on my palette. Told you we were going to use a lot of paint. We're going to keep coming back to this particular puddle of blue, so don't think I've mixed up more paint than I needed. I'd like to take a minute to thank Plaid Enterprises for sponsoring Art Talk. They are the makers of folk art acrylics, which I absolutely love using. I've used this paint since I was a young tot, and now that I'm an old fart, I still use this paint. We have a 17-piece set that we've curated just for you. Ordering information is in the description below, and we also have great brushes for you. We have a 7-piece set of Folk Art Select Firm Bristle brushes. These are absolutely incredible. I use them every time I paint. And I've never done that in my entire life. Now, let's get back to our video. All right, so I'm going to take my big brush. I'm using a 1-inch flat brush here, and I'm going to wipe the excess paint out of it. And we are going to start putting in 2 of the big white areas of color in the painting. So I'm just going to start putting this white on with my brush, and we're creating this big swirl of kind of white lightish color going on in the Starry Night. And yours will inevitably be a little bit different than mine, and I'm patting and softening this white out because I don't want it to look like a giant white curl here. It's atmospheric in the painting.
Now, I think there's a lot of debate out there, but would Van Gogh have been classified as an impressionist?
As an impressionist, no. He knew all of the impressionists and had seen their work and was, buddies with a number of the impressionist painters. But Vincent's work kind of came into his own after the initial Impressionist movement, so he is much more considered to be a post-Impressionist. But no matter what you classify him as, his work is beautiful and can, just be as beautiful as any kind of painting that you've ever seen. I have been fortunate enough to visit the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and as you're walking through the galleries, it's not unusual to see someone looking at one of his paintings and you could just see the tears streaming down their face as it's very emotional for many people to see his work in person. His painting is very, very thick. The paint is really heavily applied to the canvas, and you can see the very exaggerated brushwork that he used. And it's fascinating and beautiful.
Now, when he was in the asylum, who would have brought this paint to him, or was he able to?
Oh, he was, his brother had arranged, basically with the doctors at the asylum, like, hey, my brother's got some problems, painting's really where he needs to be focused. And the doctors at the asylum were like, well, we'll set him up with we have an empty room and we'll set him up with his own studio here.
That just seems like a different narrative than you usually hear about 1800s medicine.
Well, I don't know.
Kind of terrible things, so, like locking them in a room.
Well, I don't really know that he was getting a lot of, high quality mental health counseling, and certainly, none of the drugs that we have available today. But his therapy, basically was being able to paint, and he painted. People have calculated, in his 10-year painting career, that he basically produced some form of artwork about every 13 minutes. So his output while at the asylum was astounding. He was definitely not a lazy painter. He got to work every day and he churned out just the most, all of his artwork that you really think of, the sunflowers, the starry night, the landscapes of the French countryside, all of the biggies were done in a 10-year period, and many of them in the last very few years of his life. So when he hit his stride, he was good to go. All right, so you can see I've got a little bit of these kind of white areas on the canvas, and I'm going to shift to the workhorse of today's painting. It's my number 12 flat brush, and I'm going to show you a lot of what we're going to be doing today. So I've got some blue and some white, and I'm just brush mixing this, and I am going to begin to make a series of dashes. Notice that I'm holding the brush as far back on the handle as I can, and these dashes are going to help define the look of our starry night. So you can see it's not quite white, but it's lighter than our blue background, and I'm doing this just until I am absolutely out of paint. And I keep going over it, and I'm going to pick up some more of my light color here and just begin to build these white swirls. We're having fun here. We are singing Starry Night in our heads, better sung in my head than sung out loud. I know Dylan does not need to hear that.
And he's been practicing all day.
And Dylan is like, please do not break out into song. That is not your strong suit. All right, so we're going to just continue to put on some of these lighter swirls here. And as I move out to the edges of this, I'm going to keep picking up a little bit more blue so that it softens a bit more into the background and is not quite as pronounced. So we're just going to keep doing this for a little while, and then we'll be back with more fascinating tidbits about Vincent van Gogh. So I'm just putting the last little touches on here, and you can see there's 1,000,001 little marks. I didn't count them, so I don't exactly know how many there are, but I could keep putzing and playing around here forever. But this gives me a pretty good swirl of light color that are moving through the painting. Now, we're going to revisit this a few more times. But the next thing I want to do is to start in with our stars in our Starry Night. And the first star we're going to do is not a star, but we're going to give it a crescent moon. So up here in this area, I'm just taking a pencil and just kind of sketching on a really quick kind of crescent moon. Just so I've got the shape there. And to paint this crescent moon, I'm going to put out some yellow ochre, some medium yellow, some lemon yellow, just so I've got plenty of nice yellow colors at my fingertips when I get ready to do something. And this color, I'm just going to whip that together a little bit. You should invest in a very high quality metal palette knife. I've got a giant mixing knife here, but I also have a smaller painting knife that I use quite a bit. So those are the two palette knives that I would love for you all to assemble in your little assortment of painting goodies. All right, so still with the number 12 flat brush, I'm going to take a little medium yellow, and I will let you all know a little bit about Vincent's color palette. He painted in oils, which acrylics weren't invented until the 1960s, so it was fine for him to use oil paint. But Vincent was, Dylan's probably going to have to help me with the right terminology. When new technology comes out and people are, you know, they got to have the latest technology.
An early adopter.
Okay, early adopter. All right. So Vincent was an early adopter of the new synthetic pigments that were being developed. Many of these colors were developed for the textile industry, and some were used for artist paints. And so Vincent was an early adopter of many of these brilliant colors, which excited him very much because nobody had really seen these colors before. Problem is that the technology that they had back in what we will call the good old days, a lot of their paints were not very light fast. So some of the brilliant pinks and yellows and things that Vincent used have faded away instantly, or shortly after his death. People were noticing that some of the colors in his paintings were not as lively or vibrant as they had been. So sometimes being an early adopter is not necessarily the best thing for you, but we will forgive Vincent because he did some pretty amazing things. All right, I put a little bit of yellow ochre on there just to give this little crescent moon some dimension. And now we're going to shift to some of our, I want to make sure to say the name right, our lemon yellow. And this is going to be very, very bright. And we are going to just kind of start filling in. And I want to add some white to that to make it even brighter. So just brush mixing here on my palette.
And why did you pick Vincent for your Painting the Masters? We gave you a prompt and you knew right away you would do this.
Well, this, like I said, this is arguably one of the most famous paintings in the world. So I figured if you're going to paint the Masters, and we don't have a lot of time with each other during one of our sessions here on YouTube, so we couldn't do the Mona Lisa. That would take a little bit too much time. So this is a beautiful painting, and I think it's also something that many of you will be able to tackle without frustrating yourselves. So it's a beautiful painting, and it's something that you can get a nice likeness of. All right, what I'm doing now is creating a circle of my lemon yellow and titanium white, and then we're going to loosely kind of fill in this crescent shape, and you can just imagine how pleased Vincent must have been with these beautiful yellow and blue colors that just pop off of his canvas. The astronomers and astrophysicists and folks like that have gotten all up in Vincent's painting, and they can tell you that on the night when he supposedly painted this image, that there was no crescent moon visible. So we know that Vincent used his imagination, a very active, powerful imagination, to kind of come up with this, on his own. He was more than likely not painting outdoors in the evening.
Did he consider himself a talented artist, or were these kind of like sketch-like of like this is just what he whipped up?
No, there's a letter to his brother where he is saying that he can't be, people, were accusing him of, drinking too much all the time. And in a letter he said that, painting requires all of my concentration. I have to think of 1,000 things all at once every moment that I'm painting. And he goes, I can't stop to drink or even really smoke while I'm painting. But when I'm finished painting, the only really effective way to relax was with a stiff drink or his pipe. So, when he was painting, he was all about his painting. So as I move away from the concentrated darker yellows here and move out a little bit, I'm spacing my little dabs or dashes a little further apart. So don't forget to spread these out a little bit as you move further away from the little crescent shape. Also, you have to remember to vary the size and the shape of your dashes. So where these look a little too much the same size and shape, I'm going to come back and change them a little bit. Let's put in some more stars, because it's not just a night star, we have a starry night. I'm going to use a little medium yellow and some titanium white and just brush mix a little bit of that. One needs to be here. We'll put another one up here and another smaller one close there. We will eventually put in the cypress tree here, but we've got to put in a couple of stars down here, and let's put another one right over here that's going to be kind of caught up in that white whirl. All right, so just dabbing on a few little curls of that color, and then we'll start back in with our lemon yellow and titanium white. And you just want to make sure that your stars kind of are a round-ish shape. Doesn't have to be perfect, but more round than oval or some other kind of shape there. And we'll continue with this mix, and we'll move around so that we're not doing the same color in the same place all over our canvas.
Now, is it true that Vincent only sold one painting in his lifetime?
I'm glad that you asked that question, Dylan, because it is in fact not true. There is a very well documented sale of the Red Vineyards, which happened during his lifetime, and that happened at an exhibition of work by Van Gogh and several other post-impressionists. He did sell a couple of other works, and there are varying degrees of kind of authentication that you can find about those other sales. They were not terribly significant sales, but what I think is probably more important is that he was able to barter with his artwork. For example, if he needed some paint or canvases or things like that, his paintings were considered good enough by the people who sold fine art materials to the likes of Degas and Monet and people like that, that they would willingly barter with Vincent for some of his artwork in exchange for the supplies that he needed. It's not as though he didn't know that his work had worth and value during his lifetime. It's just that he wasn't, he didn't earn a living selling his paintings. Everybody, let's just be honest, he didn't earn a living. His brother supported him financially his entire life. So we probably have Teo to thank for all of this fabulous artwork that Vincent was able to produce because of Teo's financial support of his brother. So let's add some more of these beautiful little light colored dabs and kind of glimmers in the sky. Keep adding a little bit of white to my yellow, and as you can see over here, we go from strong yellow down to a very pale yellow. And when we get to like this little star here that's kind of being caught up in this kind of white whirl, let's take a few of these really pale yellow dabs and just kind of carry them out, because that's just really kind of very pretty. And we'll put a few of these light yellow dabs over here.
Why do you think all these kind of lavish rumors got started about him?
He died in under very suspicious circumstances. There were rumors that, he had taken his own life. I tend not to really believe that so much, because not many people would shoot themselves in the gut to commit suicide. So I think he probably was killed by some of the neighborhood or the village thugs, who then were quickly spirited out of town the next day. It's a little suspicious when the only kid in town who's waving a gun around leaves in the middle of the night after someone shows up kind of shot. The rumor mills always kick up when someone's not around to correct the situation. And if you're running an inn in a small town, and you capitalize on it just the same way that we have our fun tabloid journalism that goes on today. Somebody that's either involved or just on the fringes of stuff, decide to write a little bit about it. And there was a book written, on the 50th anniversary of his death by the woman whose family ran the inn and hotel where Vincent stayed and died. So, she's got a little skin in the game there, to talk about the crazy artists that lived with them. So, there's all sorts of, reasons why people, lock on to these stories. But every time an anniversary about Vincent's life or death comes up, more is written about it, and there is more, more stories, and, it's always very sensational. So here we are with our little stars going on, and what I want to do, we've got a lot of canvas to fill in, so we're going to start back, remember when I told you needed this big pile of blue, so we're going to take some of that blue and some white, and we are going to start carrying these lighter dabs up all over the canvas. And just make sure that they kind of follow your swirl pattern. So when they're coming around here, they're going to go around. And when they meet up with this one, they're going to swirl around in this kind of fashion. And then we're going to just carry them in different ways. Don't worry, we've got lots more of this to do. But again, I'm here on my palette mixing some of that original, we'll call it the China blue, and some white, and we will just continue to create lots of little dabs and dashes. Okay, we have 1,000,001 little swirly lines on here. We've got yellow and white and light blue, and now we need to add some contrast to this painting. We need to start to develop a little punch of color. So I'm going to take some of my China blue, and I'm going to add some ultramarine blue to that to make a blue that's a little darker this time. And I don't want it quite that dark. We're going to start slow, because we don't want to commit too much to that darker color right away. So we've got a little darker blue, and we're going to start just putting in a few little darker areas, and you can see that this is just slightly darker than what we've had before. But we're going to start to put some of these in to give us a little darker atmosphere. And I am going to pick up a little bit more ultramarine blue, and we'll add some darker dashes. And don't freak out, folks. If you are doing this and it all starts to go south or go sideways on you, not to worry. I'm going to show you how to fix that right now. So say you got a big mark that you are not in love with. Don't fret. We're going to take some of our background blue, our China blue, and we can come right back in and we can cut that into a smaller dark mark. So we're just trimming it up like where these two kind of ran together. Ordinarily I wouldn't care, but on this video I do care. So we're going to break that up. And now I don't have that big mark there. I'm going to break this up a little bit more. All right, now I don't have that big mark there anymore. So anything that you don't like, we can just cover it up. All right, so now we're just going to take some of this darker blue color and we're going to put in a few more of these little dashes around. And when you are looking at the original, at the masterwork of Starry Night, you could see kind of where Vincent put in these darker blue areas, and you can follow those, or you can follow my lesser masterful strokes of dark color on here.
And you said Vincent was creating very quickly, relatively quickly. Was he painting quickly?
Well, if you imagine that you had to create a painting a day, he didn't spend, like weeks and months on this. He was not like Paul Cézanne, who painted so slowly. Cézanne painted so slowly that his still lifes, his fruit would rot before he finished. So he ended up oftentimes painting wax fruit. So if you're a Cézanne fan, hopefully that did not burst your bubble or diminish your love of the master. But he was notoriously slow as a painter. So everybody, works at their own speed, and Vincent he had to work quickly in order to create the volume of paintings that he did. And we are so very lucky that he was quite prolific during the time he was painting. Most of the works that you know of his from the Potato Eaters, which could not be a more depressing painting. It's a brown interior with brown lighting and brown people and brown clothing. It's just a sea of sad, sad, dark coloration. And not at all what would become known as kind of Vincent van Gogh's style of painting. We know him from his exuberant color palette.
What size paintings on average did he create?
A lot of his paintings were, like 18 by 24, 24 by 36. Probably not a lot of paintings much bigger than 48 inches in size. He was not a monumental painter. But then you have to keep in mind that he couldn't afford paints and canvases and things like that. So everything he worked on had to be done with an amount of economy in play as well. I want you to notice that these strokes follow this little star around, and then they get kind of caught up in this big swirl. And we're not done playing with the dark color. It's still just mixtures of ultramarine blue and our China blue. And we need to bring some of this dark color up through here just to help create some of this great movement that we see in this night sky. Now I'm going to fess up, and when I did this, I completely omitted the village of Saint-Remy. In the original painting, it's down in the lower right-hand side, and I didn't need that for you all to know that I was painting Starry Night. So, boom, we just left it out. And we'll put in some darker, but not quite as dark, marks down here. And we'll come back in here and put some of these more China blue marks in. You can make this your own Starry Night by putting in as much or as little of this darker color as you want to. I'm just coming back and playing on top of it, never quite finishing one area before I move on to another one. So come back and play in this a little bit. Every time I'm picking up a color on my brush, it's slightly different, so that's creating a lot of variation in the painting itself, which is kind of what you want. Don't want it all to be the same, or then it's boring and nobody wants to look at it. And I assure you that if you stand in front of a Van Gogh painting, there is nothing about it that is not completely captivating. And we're finding out more and more about Vincent's work over time. They're x-raying his paintings and oftentimes finding one painting hidden underneath another because, you know, he may not have had money at the time for a new canvas, so he just painted over what was at hand. And I'm coming back with some of the China blue, going over some of these marks, just creating a little more visual drama. If you keep in mind that this was painted just a year before Vincent died, imagine what wonders we would have had if he had lived for years more. It's kind of staggering to think what we never got to see. We got to see a lot of his genius, but the potential for, you know, so much more was there. And again, I'm going back into this giant puddle of paint I made at the beginning of our session today. And when I said make a big puddle, that's what I meant. Okay, I think that's enough of that, but we need even more dark color. So I'm going to use a little pure black, put that out on my palette, and I'm going to now wipe my brush, still using that great number 12 flat brush, and I'm going to take some ultramarine blue and add a smidge of black to make it even darker. Now you got to make sure that this is still blue. It cannot be solid black. Just a really, really dark blue. There we go, and we're going to add some of this in sparingly over some of our darker areas. So where I've got, and that still looks black, so I'm going to wipe my brush. I'm going to start with more ultramarine blue and scooch into a little bit of black. There we go. It's still going to be really dark, but it's blue now. And we're going to put a few of these marks in. And this really starts to make the painting come to life. In order for your highlights and light areas to stand out, you have to have good, strong darks. And we just want a few of these here and there, kind of where we have some of our darker blue. We'll add a few of these really dark blue areas. And it doesn't matter which direction you put your marks on. Just make sure that they are not all the same size, not all the same shape, and not all spaced out the same distance. And keep in mind, you know, that even the really popular Impressionist paintings were at one time completely ridiculed for their artwork. No one was a big fan of Claude Monet's Impression Sunrise when he did that, and now nobody gives it a second thought that it's an absolute masterpiece of Impressionistic painting. And Vincent followed the Impressionist, which is why he is a post-Impressionist. I have about done all of these little blue dashes I can do. I'm going to go cross-eyed. But we're going to switch from all of this blue stuff and put in the incredibly dramatic cypress tree. And this really does divide the canvas. It provides a very, very impressive focal point, and it is dramatically different in color. So I've put out some Folk Art Thicket on my palette, and I picked up a 3/4 inch flat brush because we are going to be cooking with gas when we start this. So our cypress tree is going to start here, and it's going to kind of come down the canvas. And we've got a weird little bit of the cypress tree that's going to grow that way, and another little weird bit that's growing this way. So it's also going to be fatter at the bottom. And in photographs of Saint Remy, there are indeed these very strangely shaped cypress trees that are growing in and around the asylum. So we're putting on our thicket in longer, kind of heavier brush strokes. And these little trees are kind of Dr. Seussical trees, if you will. They are not really exactly the way a cypress tree grows, but we do what we can when we're making a copy or likeness of an original painting. So we're not questioning too much the shape of these trees. We're just going with it. And I'm not filling this in solid. I am still going with all of the little jagged brush marks. And we just continue to sort of fill in with more thicket and more of our brush marks. And I want to make sure that I've got more of this tree kind of filled out here. And it doesn't take long when you're using a big brush like this to kind of get it nicely filled in. And I like leaving a little bit of the blue showing through here and there. I don't want too much of it, but just enough. Now, let's take a little bit of black and darken our thicket so that we've got a really, really nice dark green color here. And we're going to start kind of darkening along the outside edge of the cypress, and where I covered that up, we'll just extend it out a little bit. All right, Dylan, do you have any other questions about Vincent while we are working on our cypress tree?
Well, I think you kind of hit on it earlier, but I'm just wondering, if he had lived on, would he have been as much of a master, or would he kind of have blended in, do you think?
Well, what I think is that as the post-impressionist became more and more mainstream, he probably would have fallen into that, and more than likely we would think of him today like Degas or Cezanne or some of those other painters. He wouldn't quite be in the class all by himself as this extraordinary wizard or genius that he is now. He would have just probably been known as a really great post-impressionist artist. If folks are watching and are fans of Doctor Who, there is a great episode where they bring Vincent van Gogh back to...
I do remember that.
Yes, back to present day, and he's kind of bewildered at his fame, and the museum director, curator, is talking about how he's one of the most beloved painters. And I think, that was a very clever episode for them to do, and kind of a very touching tribute to Van Gogh. I think any artist would love to come back and see, if their work, was in fact appreciated. All right, so let's do something that I think Vincent would approve of. I'm going to put out a little True Burgundy on my palette. And this True Burgundy is going to be chromatically very opposite of our dark green. So we're going to create a little visual tension here So I'm just picking up a little bit of my true burgundy, and I'm going to add some dashes of this red in the cypress tree, and that creates a lot of visual tension, and I think makes our cypress tree a little bit more interesting to look at. I'm not putting it everywhere, just here and there. And I think that's a pretty cool cypress tree. So having added our cypress tree to our Starry Night, you could see how this really dark shape kind of bisects the canvas and gives you a very nice frame of reference to look at. So this is my version of Starry Night. So as we close out, let that Don McLean song start playing in your head. And we'll see you next time on Art Talk.